Did you ever wonder why it's so hard to make a baby panda? Smithsonian National Zoo's reproductive sciences team is a leader in studying reproductive biology and technologies in the world's endangered species. In this session, we'll discuss two of these focal species. The giant panda, historically rare in nature, has been listed on the Global Endangered Species List since 1990. There are fewer than 1,900 adult pandas now living in China's bamboo forests. Although pandas were moved from endangered to vulnerable status in 2016, they're still under threat in the wild. Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute have been studying giant panda reproduction for more than 40 years. The first pandas, Ling Ling and Xing Xing, arrived in Washington, D.C. as diplomatic gifts from China in 1972. We now know that if the pairing is right, wild pandas and pandas in human care breed just as well as other bears. But Ling Ling and Xing Xing's 5 offspring did not survive more than a few days. To understand more about the reproductive biology of endangered mammals, let's talk to Pierre Camazoli, a research biologist working in the Center for Species Survival at the National Zoo. What are the biggest challenges in breeding giant pandas?
Giant pandas are challenging because they have a really short breeding season. And it's just really a couple of days where the female is really receptive to the male and can conceive. So we're talking about only 48 hours every year. So we don't want to miss this window of opportunity. And then after that, we need to make sure that the male and the female also get along together. And we want to make sure that if there is natural mating, that it is successful.
How did Smithsonian crack the code of giant panda reproduction?
So it involves a lot of basic research, basically trying to understand separately in the male and the female what are the mechanisms really leading to the onset of the breeding season. And then after that, to understand what's the best timing whenever we have to help them also either for introductions of the animals together for natural breeding or for assisted reproduction, what's the best timing? When is the best time to introduce them together so they're going to be able to conceive?
Hold up. This is a pretty advanced discussion. Before we talk about the specifics of giant panda biology, let's talk about some basics of mammalian reproduction. Mammals evolved alongside birds and became dominant life forms on planet Earth after the extinction of the dinosaurs. One of the most primitive extant mammals is Australia's platypus. With its webbed feet and duck-like bill, it even looks like a weird cross between a mammal and a bird. However, it has hair and nourishes its young with milk, all characteristics of a true mammal. Its rear opening is called a cloaca, and this combines both excretory and reproductive parts. A female makes a nest of grass underground in the banks of the stream, and in this nest she lays eggs. Yes, the platypus is a mammal that lays eggs in a nest. Another Australian native, the spiny anteater, also produces eggs. But instead of laying her egg in a nest, the female gathers it into a temporary pouch in her underbelly, where a single baby hatches after only 7 to 10 days. The infant remains in the mother's temporary pouch for 45 days or more, where it drinks mother's milk and grows. Platypus and spiny anteater are classed as monotremes, from the Greek word meaning one opening. Their cloacae serve as openings for reproduction and for elimination of waste. A more complex type of mammal, the marsupial, also reproduces via internal fertilization. But like true mammals, most marsupials have separate outlets for reproduction and waste. They also, as you probably know, carry their young in pouches. Take kangaroos, for example. After fertilization, the embryo spends about a month free-floating inside the mother's uterus, feeding off of a choriovitelline placenta, which is not quite like the placenta of a placental mammal like humans. It's formed out of the yolk sac of the female's egg. After their month in utero, the tiny bee-sized neonate marsupials are essentially still embryos when they emerge and crawl to the mother's warm pouch. There, they latch onto one of 13 nipples and drink the nutritious milk for almost 8 months. Non-marsupial mammals, such as humans, remain inside the mother's body for a much longer period of time and have a different kind of placenta, a chorioallantoic placenta. Rather than a free-floating embryo with a yolk-like placenta, the embryo takes root in the uterine wall, and the placenta attaches itself to the mother's circulatory system. This type of placenta allows the embryo of a placental mammal like a human, a bear, or a cat to remain inside the uterus for a long time while it develops. The growing fetus is attached by the umbilical cord to the uterine wall, and significant oxygen and nutrients are delivered to the fetus by the mother's circulatory system. Waste products from the fetus go in the opposite direction, diffuse through the mother's blood, and are excreted from her body through her kidneys. A placental reproductive strategy means the growing fetus does not need an eggshell, nor does it need to take the risky journey at a very early stage from the mother's uterus into a pouch. Instead, placental mammals remain safely in the mother's body until they're substantially grown. Still, after a placental mammal is born, the mother provides it with nutritious milk to stimulate its growth even more and enhance its chances of survival. So now that you have the basics, let's return to Dr. Pierre Calmazzoli to see how the basic facts of mammalian reproduction affect his work in giant panda reproductive biology.
So can you explain the mechanics of estrus and then the artificial insemination procedure?
So the female has this really short period of estrus every year. So it starts with a rise of the estrogens, which is parallel to the growing of a follicle with an egg in the ovary. And then after that, the egg is expelled from the ovary, and that's where you have 24 hours where the egg can be fertilized by sperm. But we are now able to monitor really closely all this rise of estrogens and the ovulation itself by monitoring the hormones in the urine. We don't have to draw blood. We can do that really non-invasively, and we have a really precise timing of these events. However, in the male, it's a little bit less constraining because the testosterone, which is really the hormones that driving the spermatogenesis, is really starting way earlier than the female. It usually starts a little bit longer after the estrus period of the female. So for the male, we always know that the male is ready. So the most important is to have a good idea of where the female is in his estrus period, and then to make sure that we introduce them together at the right time.
And where does the semen come from? I heard that you have some frozen somewhere.
Yes, so basically what we always want to know is to have natural breeding, right? Between the male and the female. And when it doesn't work, of course, we have to use assisted reproduction, which is, in that case, artificial insemination. So we've been using different techniques, either using fresh semen from tian-tian, from the male, and inseminating then after that the female. Or we also have a stock of frozen semen from tian-tian that's stored in the liquid nitrogen, and it was collected year before, and we can also use that frozen semen if needed.
After you perform the artificial insemination with the female giant panda, how do you follow that pregnancy through to the birth of a cub?
In giant pandas, it's also challenging to monitor the pregnancy because, first of all, the pregnancy doesn't have a really fixed duration from year to year and from individual to individual. So because the pregnancy can last between 3 to 6 months. And this is due to the fact that there is this kind of a period of delayed implantation of the embryo just at the beginning that can be really variable. And we don't really know actually when the embryo is implanted into the uterus of the female. But so it's extremely challenging for us to monitor the pregnancy.
So when the female is pregnant, you are monitoring hormones. The veterinarians are monitoring physical changes through ultrasound. Keepers are monitoring the animal's behavior. You put all of that together and you see a growing pregnancy. What's the difference between all of those factors in a pregnancy and in a pseudo-pregnancy?
But that's a good question because again, in the giant panda, what's also really special compared to other mammals is that the fetal development is pretty limited into the uterus. So it's extremely difficult to notice really physical changes. And as I said, really through ultrasound, which is also really challenging because the female is pretty big and the uterus is really small, and inside the uterus there is a small fetus. Extremely difficult, even with the best ultrasound probes that we have, to really see something. And this is really at the end that we are able to see something. So this is really specific to the giant panda, because in other species, the pregnancy is way more obvious. You see externally that the female is pregnant, and then by ultrasound there is absolutely no doubt. Usually by mid-pregnancy, you know that the female is pregnant, but in giant panda it's much more complicated.
What have been the biggest surprises along the road of cracking the code for giant panda reproduction?
I would say that surprises, I mean, the delayed implantation is not a surprise because it's a strategy used by almost 100 other species in mammals. But I would say that we are still maybe waiting for the surprise, because the surprise is really going to come when we're going to have this indicator for pregnancy that's going to tell us, okay, so this was this protein or this factor that was really telling us. That means that the body of the female is kind of carrying a baby in the uterus, and that's that surprise that we are still expecting. But so far, of course, yes, describing this really short breeding period once a year, and then after that the delayed implantation, not having any clue about the exact timing of the pregnancy. And really what's really surprising also is that for such a huge animal to give birth to such a tiny baby that's going to have to stick to the female in a den for many weeks before even able to walk or to be a little bit independent. And then after that you have, anyway, the female stays with the cub for more than a year, which is huge in terms of investment of the mother towards the offspring. And it's only 1 or 2 babies. So it's really incredible how specialized the panda really is now to his environment, because it's a carnivore eating bamboo, and really with this really special breeding period once a year. And the animals also, they are solitary animals. They only meet for the breeding season, and then after that the female really takes care of the cubs by herself.
Giant pandas are not only icons for endangered species and for the public, but they're icons here of a peaceful relationship between the United States and China. Can you talk about Smithsonian collaborations with Chinese colleagues over the last decades?
Of course. So all these efforts that we've been talking about in terms of cracking the code of the reproductive physiology of the giant panda, or even better understanding how to freeze the semen or to use it for artificial insemination, all the work was not only done here at the National Zoo. There was a lot of collaboration with our colleagues in China, who also have a lot of experience in this kind of assisted reproductive techniques. So we really benefit from each other, and we constantly work together, yes.
Can you comment on the biology of bears and why we know so much about the biology of bears because of your intensive work on giant pandas in zoo situations rather than our ability to access bears in the wild?
And that's kind of the advantage of having the animals in captivity. We can study them properly, and as long as they have the right environment,
Right.
and that they behave normally, yes, we can study them really nicely because, again, we can monitor not only the reproduction, but we can monitor also a lot of different behaviors. We can understand the nutrition, and then also we can closely study the genetics of those animals, which is really challenging in the wild because, of course, you can't really monitor a single individual as easily as in a zoo setting or in a conservation research center. So I think, yes, that's really the beauty and the value of having some individuals in captivities that we have studied really thoroughly and that are telling us a lot about their general biology for, their wild counterparts.
Really, when we have an individual that we can just look at in captivity all the time in dens,
Yes.
that's where we get the information. Can you talk a little bit about clouded leopards and other cats and how those pregnancies look from the time of artificial insemination until the time the cubs are born?
Yeah, so clouded leopards, like other cats, the difference is that, well, it depends on the cat species, but let's say that in the clouded leopard, the pregnancy it's about 3 months. And this is a pretty, let's say, 89 to 92 days. This is a really fixed period. There is no delayed implantation, so we know that after conception, either by natural mating or artificial insemination, something has to happen around 80 days or 92 days later. What's a little bit also complicated in those carnivores is that, again, you're going to have the progesterone really rising and showing kind of a sustained level for about 60 days, 65 days, but still that doesn't tell you, even for a clouded leopard, that the female is pregnant. Because usually when there is a pseudo-pregnancy, for the clouded leopard, the progesterone is going to drop around 65, 66 days. However, if you see that at 70 days you still have elevated level of progesterones, that's good. That means that there is definitely a baby. And we had already that experience several times here at the National Zoo or even in Thailand.
You may or may not be surprised to know that Smithsonian National Zoo's research biologists are at the leading edge of studies of mammalian reproductive biology because this helps us to save endangered species. Smithsonian biologists have been studying endangered cats like clouded leopards, lions, tigers, and cheetahs for decades. Let's go talk with Dr. Adrienne Crozier about her focal species, the cheetah, and how she uses an understanding of its reproductive biology to help save this animal from extinction. So thousands of years ago, there was a bottleneck for cheetahs, and we're bringing the population back. Tell me about the history of cheetahs.
So about 10,000 years ago, there was a natural population bottleneck associated with the last ice age. And they think that the whole cheetah population was reduced to maybe 12 to 20 individuals. And the population recovered from that very, very well. And they think there was approximately 100,000 animals in the wild just about 100 years ago. And today, they estimate between 7,500 and 8,000 animals in the wild. So we've lost about 90% of our wild population just in the last 100 years.
So what are the biggest threats facing cheetahs in the wild?
The biggest threat is loss of habitat. So as more and more people move into their natural home ranges, put up more farms and fences, the cheetahs are not able to maintain their normal natural home ranges. They're not able to interact with members of the opposite sex for normal reproduction, and they've also lost a lot of their prey base.
What is the biggest challenge facing cheetahs in zoos and breeding centers?
Probably the biggest challenge is understanding their biology and behavior. Cheetah females especially are very difficult to manage for successful reproduction. They don't have what we think of as normal estrus or normal reproductive cycles. They have very sporadic and intermittent cyclicity, and that can make it very difficult for us as humans to try to interpret that and manage them for successful reproduction.
And so how do you know at Smithsonian's Conservation Biology Institute here when cheetahs are ready to breed?
We rely a lot on our male cheetahs. And so in the wild, males would come across a female's territory and they would smell where she had urinated, defecated, or had been sleeping, and they would pick up on olfactory cues that would let them know that that female is either coming into estrus or is in estrus. And they would then start following her and looking for her because their home ranges are so large, it may take a day or two to actually find her. And they use a unique vocalization called a stutter bark to actually let her know that they are in her territory, they have picked up on her scents, and they're quote unquote looking for her because she smells good to them. So we use that to our advantage, and we let our males smell our female yards or enclosures, and then based on their response to her smells, hopefully they will stutter bark if she smells good, and then we move forward with fence line introductions, etc.
So when cheetahs are pregnant, what are the biggest challenges then? We have these large yards, we have calf sheds behind us, so the females have this seclusion at Smithsonian's cheetah breeding facility. What are your biggest challenges?
The seclusion is definitely important for females that are pregnant and giving birth. When the cubs are very small, females definitely need that nice peace and quiet and privacy. Some of our biggest challenges are associated with poor maternal care, especially for first-time moms.
Sometimes there are pseudopregnancies in cheetahs and other carnivores. Can you explain pseudopregnancy?
Yes, it's actually something that we're working on in our laboratory very extensively right now, is trying to understand what causes this biological mystery. So female cheetahs will ovulate when they're bred, and that means that an egg is released from their ovary and they will have an increase in progesterone. But that progesterone will stay elevated for 60 days, give or take a few days, even if they are not pregnant. So that's called induced ovulation. And so for the first 2 months or so after a female is bred, it's impossible for us to know based on her hormones if she's actually pregnant.
What does that look like for a cheetah who's pseudo-pregnant or pregnant in terms of her weight, her behavior, her hormones?
Well, the progesterone being increased will often make them act like they are pregnant, and they will also put on weight. So they may gain weight for that first 60 days and actually not be pregnant, and then when that progesterone starts to decrease again, the weight will start to decrease as well.
What is your research team doing to identify pseudopregnancy versus real pregnancy?
We are actively looking at what we call biomarkers, or proteins that are produced during pregnancy and excreted in the feces from the females. And so we're collecting the fecal samples and extracting the proteins from those samples to try to pinpoint specific proteins that we can map during the early stages of pregnancy.
When the cheetah has babies, how hard is it to manage those babies? How many babies are there? And how hard is it to manage the babies?
Average litter size is 3, and it can be more difficult depending on the female. So every female is different, just like with people, and some females are very relaxed and very willing for us to check the cubs, make sure they're healthy, get good weights on them, monitor their development and growth very closely. Other females get very nervous if we handle their cubs at all. So we go based on the female's behavior, and we very slowly start introducing the idea to the female that we are going to start approaching her den. So we may, for the first day, just go out into her yard, but don't actually touch anything near the den where the babies are. And then the next day, maybe we'll get closer to the den and just kind of work up to touching the babies. And if she's okay with all of that, then we'll start getting a good look at them to make sure they're healthy and start trying to get weights on them.
Can you compare the behavior of cheetahs to our domestic house cats?
Well, domestic house cats, I think, have this kind of reputation for being a little moody, a little aloof, and we definitely have some cheetahs that follow that pattern. The female cheetahs definitely seem to be a lot more moody than the males. The males usually think about food and think about girls, and that's about it. But the females have a lot of different nuances to their behavior. They can be very aloof in some cases, and they're all unique. They all have their own individual personalities.
Can you talk about the lover's lane here and how you use lover's lane?
So we use the lover's lane, which is the alleyway through the center of our facility, to move our animals around the facility, and we use that also to bring the males to the female yards for those yard investigations when they smell the female enclosures. We've also used that successfully for what we call fence line introductions. So if a male is excited about a female, we will then introduce him to the female on a fence line. So there's protected contact with each other at first, so we can make sure that all the behaviors we're seeing are nice and there's no aggression from male to female or the other way around. So we can use that center alleyway for those types of introductions.
For successful cheetah reproduction, is choice by the male or the female really important?
It is very important, and we've actually seen choice go both directions. So we've had males breed a female, and then a few months later, when she wasn't pregnant, we tried to use that same male with that female again, and he was not at all interested in her the second time around. We've had definitely females that prefer some males over the other. So it definitely can go both directions, and we've seen it go both ways here. I think one of the things that surprised me when we started managing our cats here for reproduction and for breeding was how difficult the females are from a behavior standpoint to understand. And although we rely on our males an awful lot to help us understand when the females are coming into estrus, just because a male is excited about a female and he thinks she smells good does not mean the female will be receptive. And so it's been just a very interesting learning process with each individual female, because they're all different, to try to figure out when she is receptive and how to match that up with what we're seeing from our males. So a lot of our research and animal care staff interact very closely with the people on the ground doing the work with cheetahs in the range countries. We collaborate with them on their research projects. We also have in the past sent staff over to help support them with their research activities, with helping to generate funds for their research programs. And education is also a really big part of how we interact with the people doing the work in the field. What they do is so critical to cheetah conservation, and it's important for us to get that message back to the people visiting our zoos in this country. So relaying that information back to the public is a really important way that we can support those field programs, but also helping the general public understand why the animals that we have in our facilities are so crucial to our programs, as well as making that link back to the wild.
So, now that you've heard from some of our reproductive biology experts, I hope you understand the vital role zoos are playing saving animals from extinction. The Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute's center doesn't just breed animals. It plays a huge role in research and technological innovation. From genetics to endocrinology to cryopreservation, the technologies we help develop will help to conserve species from all over the world.